Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at Etrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 Ultimate Rear Helper Springs with internal jounce bumpers on a 2022 Chevrolet Silverado 2500. 3/4 ton trucks like we have here today do a really good job of towing, and our neighbor today, he has a very nice truck that he has a B&W Companion Fifth Wheel, so a lot of that load is going to be right directly on the truck, and a lot of times that's going to cause it to squat. No matter really what the trailer is, trucks are still built for comfort even though they are heavy duty, and that's where sometimes you start to see the shortcomings of the factory suspension. So you have jounce bumpers that are there, but it takes a long time for those to really compress and make contact with the axle. So until then, that suspension is going to be really under stress, and unfortunately that's going to take away from some of that movement of the shock. So it's not really able to do what it needs to do when it's squatted down, and that translates to quite a few things. You're going to have a lighter front end as the truck pitches up, so you lose that steering feel, you lose braking, your headlights are going to be pitched up, and overall you're just going to be putting a lot of stress on that suspension. And it's not to say that the truck can't handle it, it's just supplementing that factory suspension to make sure that the truck is going to be nice and level, and it's just going to tow the best way possible. Now these are pretty heavy duty. They have a load capacity of 5,000 pounds. That's not going to give you more capacity per se, but it can hold that weight, which on something like this, again, having a fifth wheel trailer, this isn't really going to be an issue for this truck. And once he airs that up, it's really going to make it feel like it's got just the grunt to be able to do it. It's just going to give the suspension the best fighting chance to tow it great, and it's going to translate through the rest of the vehicle. But the good thing about these ones is they still have internal jounce bumpers. So sometimes people are worried about the ride quality when you're not loaded up, and that's where these ones really come into play. Having that internal jounce means that you can actually still have that compressing down and acting as suspension, because you do have to replace your factory jounce bumpers. So some other airbags are just simply using that bag, where this one has a little bit more structure, a little bit more body, but still the adjustability when you do have those heavy loads to really air it up and tow better. Now, going along with replacing those factory jounce bumpers with these new ones, these are a little bit taller than your factory ones, so it's going to engage a little bit faster. So even if it's a light load, it's still going to be able to engage faster and just not wear out that factory suspension. And then when it comes to adjustability, you're going to want to make sure that you keep at least 5 PSI in the bags at all times, just to kind of keep that structure, but you can go all the way up to 100 PSI. And the way that you're going to do that is just using a manual fill here. So we have our Schrader valves, and we have this currently in a dual path system. So that means if you have a load that's slightly tilted to one side or the other, you can adjust the bags individually to get you that perfect comfort. So with our bags in place, you can see that this is exactly where your jounce bumper goes. And what's really cool about this system is there's no drilling required to get anything mounted up. It uses a lot of the factory spots with some really clever bracketry to make sure that everything plays well. And that just makes for an easier installation. So where our jounce cup was, there's a U-bolt that brackets around there. We bracket around the frame. And then also our bottom brackets have spots for our ABS that we have to move. So it really doesn't interfere with anything. And overall, this is one of the easier airbag systems that I've installed. Now, once you have them installed too, you can always add a onboard compressor. That way you can control air at the flip of a switch from the inside of your vehicle, maybe from your phone, or maybe a module, depending on the system that you're using. But if not, you can manually fill it whenever you need, and it's just simple. As far as maintenance goes, it's very low as well. Really, once it's installed, you're just going to be able to enjoy it right away. And as I mentioned, the installation is not very hard to do. It bolts together really well. The instructions are very good. So I'm going to walk you through all of them. You can follow along. Make sure you get your bags installed. Now the first thing we're going to do to begin our installation is get our spare tire lowered and out of the way. It's going to give us a lot more space to work under here. Now on these trucks, they do kind of have this cable that's got just a little carabiner clip, so make sure you unhook that before lowering your tire down. Now, throughout this process, we're going to need to raise up the vehicle on the frame, and that way that suspension is going to unspring, giving us more space to work as far as getting our bags in. So I would highly recommend, if you're doing this in your driveway or garage, chalk the front wheels and then take a floor jack, raise it up on the hitch. That's generally a good spot, or on the frame. If you need to, you can put some jack stands. So since we're on a lift, I'll be using a trans jack to raise this up. Something else I'll point out, on these Chevy trucks, the frame undercoating is pretty serious, and it does a good job of protecting it, but it's kind of an oil base, and once you get it on your hands, it's really hard to get off. So if you have some nitrile gloves throughout this process, it's definitely going to make things a little bit cleaner. Now we do need to remove the factory jounce bumpers, and a lot of times if these are fighting you, you can spray some soapy water to help lubricate them. These just pop into place with pressure, so you can use a pry bar to kind of pry on there. What I've found is with this raised up, it gives me enough room to slide a 3/8 extension, and that just kind of gives you the leverage to be able to pop these out pretty easily. So go ahead and do that on both sides. Now you're going to head to where the jounce strike plate is, and you're going to have a 13mm bolt, and this is holding in our ABS brake line here. So where the hard line goes into this bracket, into the soft line on the caliper, you're going to find that 13mm. Go ahead, get that removed. And our lower plate's going to go here eventually, so we're just going to kind of pull this back to make some space, and we're going to do that on the other side as well. Now on our bracket, the larger wire loom is clamped on there. There's just a plastic clip here, and if you can push on both sides, there's tabs that kind of lock it in. It's a little bit tight here, but with a pair of needle nose, you can kind of pinch that, and then we'll get this separated. Now we're going to start assembling some of our bag assembly here. Now take your roll plate and get the spot with the 3 brass fittings. That's where we're going to line this up. We're then going to take our 90-degree push connect fitting and just hand thread this in for now. And when it comes to brass fittings, really tighter is not always better. So what we're going to do is tighten this by hand. And then with a 7/16 wrench, what I try to do is find a nice spot that's straight across from here. We're going to do 1.5 turns, so make sure you have a nice reference mark. So we'll do 1 and then a half. And then we're going to repeat the same process on our other bag. Next, we'll take our top bracket, and this is going to line up here. That you can see this cutout. That's going to go where our air fitting is. So just kind of align your roll plate and your top bracket. You'll then take the hardware that we have here, these flathead bolts, and I'm just going to hand tighten it in for now. These kind of can be a little tricky to line up. There we go. And there's a torque setting that is found in the instruction manual for these. So we're going to torque these down. And in order to do that, I have a 3/8 drive hex here. This is a 7/32, which is going to be what you're looking for. So we'll go ahead, we'll get these torqued down properly. I'll grab an extension so I can pass over this bracket. And sometimes when torquing these, it's actually easier to take your whole assembly and let the bracket kind of hold it in place. Otherwise, it's going to kind of rotate on you. But we'll go through and get these both torqued down, and then we're just going to repeat the same process on the other bag. So with these set up, we have our driver's side bracket that we'll start on first, and we're going to be using this furthest rear hole and then this third one. So we'll take our airbag assembly, and the air fitting is going to go towards the angled side. So this should square up kind of where we see kind of our mounting brackets. Our air fitting should kind of hang off to this side. So I'll just flip this over. Grab your roll plate. And then this one, you just kind of align those fittings there. So now just make sure that you have those holes in the same spot. So as you kind of flip it over, just kind of keep note. If you need to, you can put a little chalk marker or paint marker, whatever you have, just to make sure that you have the proper ones. And then we're going to go through, get these mounted up, and then torque them down. We're going to repeat the same process on the other side. So go ahead and get both your assemblies ready to go. Now with our assembly all set up, we're going to get this in place, and this is definitely where it helps having that lifting on the frame to really get us that spot to where it's going to be large enough for this to slide into place. And we're going to be putting this around our jounce bumper plate where we remove that 13mm bolt. So this needs to slide in place Now sometimes you can compress these bags, but these have the internal jounce bumpers, so you're not going to get a whole lot of wiggle room here. So we may have to kind of finesse this in here, making sure that we're avoiding obviously any of the factory wire loom and lines. So let's slide this in first here up top. And if you need to, you can kind of squish the bag around. That's going to give us just enough to slide this in. And then this bracket that we previously removed, you are going to have to kind of move that. And just make sure when you're putting this in, obviously you have the air fitting facing towards the middle of the frame. It's pretty tight by the gas tank, so we're going to kind of play around with this until we can get it to drop in. There we go. Now when getting this in place, the top really stays in place because you have that jounce cup. So this really doesn't have a whole lot of wiggle. And on the bottom, what you're going to be looking for is our bracket will go into the new hole, and then it will thread through here, the one that we previously removed. So you should be looking for the opening in there, making sure that that's aligned. We're not going to put our hardware in yet, but making sure that this sits flat and it's aligned with that. That's kind of what we're looking for. Now, while we're here on the bottom of our bracket, there's a spot to put our plastic clip that we removed previous, so we can just snap that in place. And if it's not completely going in there, we can throw a zip tie around just to kind of hold this in. What we're going to do is take this small bracket, and there is an L on this one, there's an R on the other, obviously, and this is going to slide over to where these slots are going to kind of align here around our bracket, and this is going to allow us to get our ABS, that plastic clip that we pushed out, snapped in place. And while we're here, grab your carriage bolt, and this is going to pass through this section here. And then we're going to take our serrated flange nut and thread this up to where it's going to hold this in place. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side as well. So I got our flange nut on here. It is not tight. You just want that to support it. But on the back side, or I guess technically the front side, towards the front of the vehicle on our bracket, the lower one, we're going to be dropping a carriage bolt in. Now with our lower bracket, this goes around our axle. We're going to put this around those carriage bolts, and these holes are slotted. So just try to get this to where it's pretty well centered up as much as possible. And also that it's not, putting pressure on that wire loom. And once you kind of have that in place, we'll take our serrated flange nuts, and I'm just going to get these started as well. And we're going to try to make it as even as possible, just kind of using the threads. So tighten accordingly. Now, before we tighten this down, it's a good chance, since this is slotted, we can slide this lower bracket and the carriage bolts. We want to make sure it's pretty well straight and centered up between our U-bolts for our leaf spring pack and the shock mount. So kind of get this in between the two of them. It's smaller than a finger gap here, but once it's in place, then we'll just tighten these down by hand to kind of hold that in. Now, another thing to check is make sure that your carriage bolts are nice and perpendicular with the axle. And when we get ready to tighten these down, there is going to be a torque setting, and we're going to be using a 9/16 socket to accomplish this. Now, because it is kind of balanced on each side, you're going to want to kind of snug it back and forth. You don't want to just crank down on one side. So, we'll start here, and then I'll kind of move to the back. Just try to make sure that our threads are fairly even between the two of them before getting these torqued down. So with these torqued down, we're just going to come back to this top retaining flange nut, and we'll just tighten this down, and we'll do that on both sides. Now we can get our ABS bracket put back in place, and we're going to be using this small hex head and a flat washer. And this has got it's already threaded, so it's not going to draw all the way back into that original hole. So just kind of, I'm going to hand tighten this in place now, and then with a 13mm socket, we'll just snug this down. Now before we tighten this down or put any hardware, we're going to grab our large bolt, put a flat washer on it, and I'm going to rotate the eyelet so I can pass my bolt through. And that's going to create our, basically our cradle around the frame here. So I'm going to drop these in. I'll take my serrated flange nuts and I'll get these started. We're going to leave it loose for now. So just kind of get these in place, just hand tight. Now I recommend if you are having issues getting this started, you can lower down your jack, whatever you have on your frame, just a little bit. And that's going to help kind of get the plate in place anyway. So you might want to do that on, just to give yourself, you can see as I'm lowering this down, it's giving us quite a bit of threads to be able to kind of snug this up. We're not getting it super tight. But what we need to do is make sure that we can pass our U-bolt from the outside of the frame rail through around the jounce cup bumper, and it's going to slide through here. So this just kind of wraps around those jounce bumper mounting points to create a nice solid mounting point here. So just pass this through, and it might get a little tight around that jounce bumper, so if you need to, you can kind of tap it from the outside. There's one. And that one's just about started. So I'm going to just put this here so it holds it in, and then I'm going to grab my dead blow and just kind of knock it from the side, just kind of get those threads to push through. It is almost started though, so if you need to, you can use this to kind of draw it in. Now our hardware is all in place and all the top is still just loose. It's just hand tightened on there, and the reason being is when we run our airlines, we're going to want to put air pressure in the bags, and that's going to really press it against the frame, make sure that it's going to be up against that for us to torque it down. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and get our airlines ran back to where you want them. Now we're going to be putting a compressor on here a little bit later, which you can always tie into your system. So if you're doing a single path, dual path, however you run it, just make sure that you have a nice clean path, that you're staying away from anything that's moving. So a lot of times you follow the factory wire loom. That's going to be a great way to get yourself back, and I'll show you how to get those fittings in. Now when it comes to mounting up your air fittings and running your lines, first you need to determine how you're going to mount it up and where. So you can drill holes kind of here in the plastic. You can utilize using it as a license plate mounting spot. On the Chevys here, there's some metal cladding back there that you may have to drill out just to make sure that you get enough threads. So what I've opted to do is, we actually had a spare bracket that is actually from a different manufacturer, but this makes for a really nice way to get your fittings mounted up. Now, you don't have to get this bracket in particular. You can pick up a long bracket here, and that's going to have a large hose clamp that goes on your hitch and create a mounting point. So if you want to fabricate, by all means do that. But many of the spots that we see are going to be license plate, or again, just kind of drilling those here. I would recommend having a left and a right. That way you have manual fill on your bags. So what I'll do is I get one in place, and there is a proper way to do this. You're first going to thread the hex nut on there, and then there's going to be a star washer on the back. And once you pass that through, that's really to adjust how much thread you want to stick out. You'll then finish it up with the rubber washer, a flat washer, and then the other hex. Now to get this tightened down, you don't have to get crazy here, but just a 13mm socket you can go through and tighten by hand. And with this in place, I'm going to start routing it over to my passenger side. There's going to be a few things that we need to take care of as far as staying away from heat, but I'm going to get this all in place, and then once you kind of get that ran, then you can cut it, and you should have enough length to go to the other bag. Just kind of just know that you don't have a ton of extra airline, so try to make it a pretty easy path, but also safe. Now I've pretty much routed mine, and I just want to show you how to cut the airline tube. You want to be careful here. I'm using a tubing cutter, and this makes sure that it doesn't deform the airline in the process of cutting it. So using just a pair of snips normally isn't going to be the best way, because it makes it an almond shape or oval shape. And on the push connect fittings, it's going to make it to where it has the potential to bleed through there. So using a tubing cutter is a nice quick way to do that. Take any flashing off before putting it in the push connect fitting. And on the passenger side, once you make that cut, you're going to grab the heat sleeve that is included in the kit, and this just slides over to protect your airline tube from any excess heat since it is very close to the exhaust. So I'm just going to slide that on there for now. We can always move it. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'll get my driver's side, and I'll show you the finished product of how it's all hooked up. Now, I have everything in place. I'll show you my path. So starting off with the passenger side, I utilized a lot of the factory wire loom that was here before making my way up over the rear cross member. I then just kind of used the hole in our bed frame here to zip tie this up and made my way over. Now, once you get close to the exhaust, that's where you're really going to want to make sure you have that heat wrap or the sleeve here in place of closest to the exhaust where it's at. So kind of following it up on the frame rail is going to be a good way to keep that out of the way. And then I then curled this down. So you want to make sure that you don't have any kinks or bends in the line. So it's definitely key to make sure you leave yourself a little bit of extra for that loop. Now on the driver's side, I then followed this path up, went up over the cross member, and you have a bunch of these modules here, but I made my way over to this large factory wire loom, the one that we kind of moved earlier, and then made my way over. Now I put an extra curl of line just to kind of get this in place because later we are putting a compressor system in, so I wanted to leave myself a little bit of wiggle room if I needed the line before putting it into our push connect fittings. So at this point, what we're going to want to do is get a little bit of pressure in our bag. So 10 psi is what we're looking for, so we'll go ahead and get these filled up. Now filling the bags up to just 10 psi is going to be two things. It's going to get those plates nice and tight, exactly where we want them so we can get the hardware torqued down, but also it's going to be a good chance to check for leaks. So as we fill this up, we're going to listen audibly for leaks, but also I'm going to take some soapy water and spray down my connections. So go ahead and douse your fittings, and what you're looking for with the soapy water is large bubbles to form, and that's going to give you a sign that you do have a small leak going on. And really what it comes down to is normally just the connection in the push connect fitting is enough to do that. So if that's the case, what you're going to want to do is bleed out that bag on the Schrader valve before coming back, recutting that fitting and pressing it back in. So as I sprayed mine, we don't have any large bubbles forming, so that's a good sign. So now we need to come back to our upper plate mounting. So we're going to start by doing our square ones that go around the frame first. That's going to allow this jounce bumper U-bolt to kind of go up as far as possible. So torque settings are found in the instruction manual. And same thing, just kind of bounce back from one to the other, making sure that it's nice and even. Now on this one, you may have to put a 9/16 wrench on the top of that long bolt that we have here just to keep it from spinning. Now we'll go ahead and we'll get the two horizontal studs here from our U-bolt, and it's going to use the same torque setting. Now we need to get our heat shield put in place, and this basically creates a nice barrier between our airbag and the exhaust that's pretty close. So what I do is I just take the heat shield and press it on the exhaust to kind of form, and then from here we take our tabs and we're creating a mounting tab for our we're using large hose clamps, so just kind of bend this up, and you want airspace, so you want to have a little bit of a gap. That way it's going to sit, pressed away from it, not just resting on the exhaust. So just a quick bend up, down, and then create enough of a tab for your hose clamp to go around it. And you're going to want to just kind of feel through here of where's the closest spot to the bag. You also want to make sure that there's clearance. So I think right about here will work out well. And something that we're also going to want to do just to make sure that it's going to work properly is once we get this in place, you're going to want to let go of the air in the bag, raise it up, make sure that there's no clearance issues. So this is just going to kind of strap on here, and that's going to allow us to get this tightened down. Now the only thing left to do is get your spare tire put back in place and remove any of the jack stands or jacks that you had, and then you can adjust your pressure to, if you're planning on towing right away, you can adjust that, or you can just start driving, but make sure that you have at least 5 psi in the bags. And that was a look and installation of the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 Ultimate Rear Helper Springs with internal jounce bumpers on a 2022 Chevrolet Silverado 2500.